For a long time, I looked for stability in all the wrong places. I thought peace would come when I achieved certain things, when I reached certain levels, when I finally had enough. I chased after approval, success, relationships that would complete me. And even when I got what I wanted, that restlessness was still there, untouched, waiting in the silence of the early morning hours. Recently, though, I found an answer that changed everything. I realized that the stability I was searching for was never on the outside, because there's a place within us that nothing and no one can shake. To find that place, we first need to understand how our mind tricks us, because we spend our whole lives looking outside for something that can only be discovered within. This search isn't new. It isn't unique to our generation or our time. It's the same search that has driven humanity since the beginning, the same question that echoes through the centuries. How do you find peace in a world that never stops changing? There's a story that answers this question in a way that could change how you see your own life. It was written over 100 years ago by Hermann Hesse in 1922, and it's called Siddhartha. If you've watched the other video I did on Hesse, you know he didn't write ordinary stories. And if you already know Siddhartha, you might think you know where this is going. But maybe you don't. Because this isn't just a classic novel. It's the portrait of a journey that many people live out in silence. The journey of someone who has already tried everything, made too many mistakes, suffered enough, and is starting to suspect that the stability they were looking for was never on the outside. Siddhartha was born into a privileged family in ancient India. His father was a respected priest, a man who mastered the sacred texts and performed rituals with flawless precision. From childhood, Siddhartha was prepared to follow that path. He learned the scriptures, memorized the mantras, developed rigorous discipline in meditation. He was intelligent, handsome, admired by everyone who knew him. The young men wanted to be like him. The women desired him. The elders saw him as the future of the tradition, the kind of person you look at and think, he made it. He has everything I wish I had. I know that feeling. You probably know it too. Looking at someone who seems to have it all figured out and feeling like something's wrong with you, like you're behind, like there's some piece of the puzzle missing that everyone else seems to have found, except you. The problem is, the outside image rarely shows what's happening on the inside. The people who seem most stable are often carrying the biggest storms. Siddhartha had everything society considers success: position, respect, a guaranteed future, admiration. But he carried a restlessness that no ritual could soothe. He knew the right words, could recite the texts about unity and transcendence, but he didn't feel any of it in his own body. There was a distance between what he said and what he lived, between the character he played for others and who he was when no one was watching. That distance was becoming unbearable. I spent years living like that, saying the right things at the right times, making the expected choices, building a life that seemed to work, that seemed to make sense. But inside, something didn't fit. A quiet voice asking if this was it, if this routine was all life had to offer, if this was really the path I had chosen, or just the path I ended up on without thinking too much. I ignored that voice. After all, complaining about a seemingly good life seems like ingratitude. It seems like weakness. It seems like you're looking for problems where there are none. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, in his work The Sickness Unto Death, called this despair. Not the dramatic despair, with tears and screams and visible breakdowns. A quiet despair. The despair of not being who you really are. Of living a life that looks right in the eyes of others, but doesn't belong to you. Kierkegaard said most people live their whole lives like this, without realizing it. They follow the paths laid out by family, culture, their time. They do what's expected, say what's appropriate, occupy the places assigned to them, and they call this living. The tragedy is that many die without ever waking up. Siddhartha realized what was happening, and when you truly realize it, there's no going back. The illusion breaks. The veil falls. You're faced with a choice that changes everything. His problem wasn't a lack of knowledge. He knew more than most people would know in several lifetimes. Sacred texts, meditation techniques, elaborate rituals, profound philosophy. He mastered all of it. The problem was that knowing about something isn't the same as living it. Knowledge and wisdom are completely different things. You can read every book about swimming, study the biomechanics of the movement, memorize the techniques of Olympic champions, watch hours of video, consult the best coaches. But that doesn't teach you how to swim. To swim, you need to get in the water. Feel the cold, the fear, your body's resistance. Swallow water, sink, come back up. Only then does knowledge become experience. Only then do words take on flesh. I've read many books on how to live better, watched hundreds of videos, taken courses, followed advice from people who seemed to have found the answers, and I stayed in the same place because there's a fundamental difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge you can transmit with words, with books, with lessons. Wisdom can only be gained by living, by messing up, by falling, by getting back up, by going through the process that no one can do for you. Hermann Hesse makes this clear in the book. The teachings Siddhartha received were maps, and a map, no matter how detailed, is not the territory. You could study the map of a forest for years, know every trail, every turn, every river, every mountain. But when you actually step into that forest, when you smell the wet earth, when you hear the sounds no book could describe, when you feel the sun's heat through the leaves, you realize the map was just a shadow. A useful representation, no doubt, but completely different from the thing itself. So Siddhartha made a decision that changed everything. He decided to leave. There's a courage that doesn't appear in war stories, a quiet courage, almost invisible, that no one applauds and no one recognizes. The courage to say no to what everyone expects from you, to disappoint people you love, to abandon the familiar safety for something you can't even quite explain, something with no name, no form, but that calls from within with a force you can't ignore. Siddhartha's father didn't understand. How could he? His son had everything: position, respect, a guaranteed future, the continuation of a sacred tradition spanning generations. Why would anyone throw that away? Why would anyone abandon what others spend their lives trying to achieve? But Siddhartha couldn't pretend anymore. He told his father he had to go, that he needed to seek for himself what the books couldn't give. And he stood there all night, waiting for permission that might never come. His father resisted, argued, pleaded, used every weapon a father has against a son who wants to leave. But when morning came, he realized his son had already left on the inside. His body was still there, occupying that space, but his soul was elsewhere. And when someone leaves on the inside, no force in the world can hold them back. I've had moments like that. You probably have too. Moments when you realize you can't stay in the same place anymore, that something has to change, even if you don't know exactly what. Those moments are scary because they don't come with guarantees. You don't know if it will work out. You don't know what you'll find on the other side. You only know that staying put has become impossible, that the pain of not changing has become greater than the fear of changing. Siddhartha left his father's house without knowing where he was going. He had no plan, no guarantees, no idea what the next day would even look like. He only had the certainty that he couldn't stay where he was. Sometimes that's all we need to start. We don't need to see the end of the path. We don't need all the answers. We just need to take the first step into the unknown. When you abandon everything you know, when you let go of the hands that held you, when you leave behind the structures that gave you security, the strongest temptation is to find someone who seems to have the answers. A master, a system, a method that promises to solve everything at once. Siddhartha felt that temptation. First, he found the Samanas. They were wandering ascetics who believed spiritual liberation came through mortifying the body. The logic was simple. If physical desires cause suffering, destroy the desires. Eliminate the source of the problem. They fasted until their bones showed through their skin. They slept exposed to the elements in the cold and heat. They denied themselves any comfort, any pleasure, any bodily satisfaction, hoping that by destroying the body, the soul would finally be free. Siddhartha dove into this with the same intensity he gave to everything. He learned to control hunger until hunger ceased to exist. He learned to slow his breath to almost nothing. He learned to detach from physical sensations in a way that impressed even the oldest masters. For 3 years, he lived like this. 3 years of deprivation, of denial, of fighting his own body. And for 3 years, he didn't find what he was looking for. I've also tried extreme approaches at different times in my life. Periods of rigid discipline, inflexible routines, denial of any pleasure or distraction. The idea was that if I controlled everything around me, if I mastered every impulse, I'd find peace. What I discovered was that you can run from the body's desires, but you can't run from yourself. You can fast, meditate, mortify yourself, stay up all night, give up all pleasures. But when you open your eyes in the morning, you're still there. The same self you tried to eliminate still exists. Maybe thinner, maybe more disciplined, but fundamentally the same. Asceticism was just another form of escape, an escape disguised as a spiritual search, trading one prison for another, and trading the cage of comfort for the cage of deprivation, without ever touching what really mattered. Then Siddhartha heard about Gautama, the Buddha, the enlightened one, the one who had supposedly achieved total liberation from suffering, the end of all desire, the peace that surpasses all understanding. Stories about him spread all over India. People came from far away to hear his words. Disciples abandoned everything to follow in his footsteps. They said he had discovered the definitive path. Siddhartha went to him. He traveled considerable distances, faced difficulties along the way. He finally found the Buddha in a grove, surrounded by attentive followers. He listened to his teachings with total concentration. He observed the peace on his face, the clarity in his words, the absence of any trace of desire or fear or restlessness, and he recognized that he was in the presence of someone who had truly found what he was seeking. Here was a man who had walked the same path and reached the end. But something happened that I didn't expect when I first read the book. Siddhartha did not become the Buddha's disciple. He approached the master and said something that reveals the depth of his understanding. He said he recognized Gautama's enlightenment. He saw in him the living truth, embodied, undeniably present, but that this truth could not be transmitted through words. The Buddha's enlightenment belonged to the Buddha and no one else, and each person needed to find their own path, live their own experiences, make their own mistakes, discover their own truths. Hermann Hesse puts a phrase in Siddhartha's mouth that changed how I see things. Knowledge can be communicated, but not wisdom. You can teach facts. You can transmit information. You can explain concepts with perfect clarity. But that understanding which transforms life from the inside, that changes not just what you know but who you are, that can only be lived. There is no shortcut, no transfer. No master can give you what you have to earn yourself. This doesn't mean masters are useless. It means the best master is the one who points you back to yourself, who encourages you to question, to experiment, to make mistakes and learn from them. A master who gives you all the answers doesn't set you free. It traps you in a different way. It makes you dependent, a follower, someone who needs external permission for every step. Siddhartha left the Buddha with respect and gratitude. He acknowledged his greatness. He admired his achievement. And he went on alone, in the opposite direction. What happened next caught me off guard the first time I read it. After years of asceticism, of denial, of intense spiritual seeking, Siddhartha did something completely unexpected. He dove into the world, completely, without reservation, without guilt. He met Kamala, a courtesan of rare beauty and intelligence. A woman who mastered the art of pleasure the way others master philosophy or music. She taught him the art of physical love, not as something dirty or sinful, not as a fall or temptation, but as a refined skill, a form of connection between two bodies, an ancient dance with its own rules and depths. Siddhartha learned. He, who had fasted for years, who had slept on stones and gone days without eating, now explored pleasure, with the same intensity he once gave to denial. He met Kamaswamy, a wealthy merchant who saw potential in that strange former ascetic. There was something about Siddhartha, a presence, an intelligence that caught the experienced businessman's attention. Siddhartha learned business, buying, selling, negotiating, accumulating, investing. He, who had abandoned all possessions, who had lived on alms, now had houses, fine clothes, servants. He lived like a rich man, surrounded by comforts he once despised. And he discovered gambling, bets, dice, the adrenaline of risking and winning, the pain of risking and losing. He played with the same passion he once meditated with. Whole nights lost among the tables, waiting for the next roll, feeling his heart race with every play. This confused me on the first read. It seemed like a fall, a detour from the spiritual path, a regression from everything he had gained. But Hesse doesn't present it that way. He presents it as a necessary part of the journey, because there are truths we only learn by diving into them. Illusions that only dissolve when we've lived inside them long enough. There's an idea that helped me understand this. We don't achieve wholeness by denying parts of ourselves. The impulses we consider inferior, the desires we try to repress, the parts we hide even from ourselves, need to be recognized and integrated. It doesn't mean acting without ethics or responsibility. It means stopping the pretense that those aspects don't exist. It means bringing light to the dark corners instead of locking the door and pretending nothing's there. I spent a long time trying to be only the good version of myself, repressing anger, desire, ambition, envy, anything that seemed inappropriate. What I achieved was creating a divided person. One part I showed the world, another I hid even from myself. Integration began when I stopped fighting what I was and started understanding why I was that way. Siddhartha lived the pleasures, lived the wealth, lived the pursuit of more. And he lived long enough to see it all lose its meaning. Years passed, many years. Siddhartha aged in that life of merchant, lover, and gambler. And something started to change, slowly at first, then more and more intensely. The things that once brought pleasure now seemed empty. Gambling left a bitter taste in his mouth. Business seemed like endless repetition, numbers going up and down with no real meaning. Even his time with Kamala lost its former intensity. Pleasure became routine. Passion became a mechanical habit. He looked at his life and felt nausea. He was no longer the restless youth who set out in search of truth. No longer the disciplined ascetic who fasted under the sun. He was a middle-aged man, rich, fat, tired. His eyes had lost their sparkle. His face showed the marks of someone who had lived too much and felt too little, who had consumed without ever being satisfied, who had sought outside what could only be found within. There's a German term with no exact translation. Weltschmerz, the pain of the world. That deep melancholy that comes when we realize the distance between how life is and how it could be. When we realize that all our achievements, possessions, pleasures haven't brought us any closer to anything that really matters. That we spent decades chasing shadows while the substance slipped through our fingers. I've known that feeling. That moment when you look at everything you've built and ask, is this it? When you realize you spent years chasing things that didn't have the weight you imagined. When the emptiness you tried to fill with achievements is still there, untouched, waiting. One ordinary night, a night like so many others, Siddhartha simply left. He left the house, left the business, left Kamala sleeping. He took nothing, said nothing. He just walked into the darkness, without direction, without plan, without hope. He came to a river, the same river he had crossed years before when he left the Buddha and entered the world of pleasures. Now, on the bank of that river, under the faint light of the stars, he looked at the dark water and thought about drowning himself. This is the lowest point of the journey. Rock bottom. When all the exhaustion, all the disillusionment, all the accumulated pain become unbearable. When looking back shows only ruins. When looking ahead shows only more of the same. When the only way out seems to be not existing anymore. I've had moments like that, not necessarily thinking about dying, but thinking it wasn't worth going on like that something had to end for something new to begin. These moments are dangerous, but they can also be transformative, because sometimes you have to hit the bottom to finally stop sinking. From the depths of himself, Siddhartha heard a sound, Om, the sacred syllable he had learned in childhood, in his first lessons with his father, but had forgotten during all those years of seeking and losing. The sound didn't come from outside. It didn't come from the river or the forest or the sky. It came from within, from a part that remained untouched by all the changes, falls, mistakes, a part he didn't even know still existed. He fell asleep there, on the riverbank, with the sound still echoing, and when he woke up, something had changed. It wasn't that the problems had disappeared. It wasn't that the pain was gone. It was something more subtle, as if, for the first time in many years, he was looking at life with clear eyes, without the layers of desire, fear, expectation, judgment that had once distorted everything. He looked at the river, saw the water flow, saw that the water was always moving, always changing, but the river remained the same. The water passing now wasn't the water from a moment ago, and yet the river was the same. In that simple moment, observing something as ordinary as flowing water, something opened up inside him. Sometimes hitting bottom is necessary, not because suffering is good in itself, not because pain has mystical value, but because when we've lost everything, when there's nothing left to lose, when even the will to go on abandons us, a strange freedom appears. We stop clinging. We stop fighting the inevitable. We stop trying to control what can't be controlled. And in that surrender, in that absolute letting go, something new can be born. Something that couldn't be born while we were still fighting. On the bank of that river lived a man named Vasudeva, a ferryman, someone who spent his days ferrying people from one bank to the other, in silence, in simplicity. He wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, he had no titles or achievements the world recognized. He only had his boat, his hut, and a peace in his eyes that few people ever attain. Siddhartha remembered him. Years before, when he first crossed that river, Vasudeva had been the ferryman, and Siddhartha had promised to return one day. Now he was back. Not as the young seeker full of certainties and questions, not as the rich merchant full of possessions and arrogance. He came back as an empty man, a man who had lost everything, and because of that, finally ready to truly learn. Vasudeva received him without questions, without judgment, without lectures on where he had gone wrong or what he should do differently. He offered him a place to sleep and simple food. And when Siddhartha said he wanted to stay, wanted to live there and learn from the river, Vasudeva just smiled, a smile that said more than 1,000 words. From that moment on, Siddhartha's life was completely transformed. He, who had been a respected priest, a disciplined ascetic, a rich merchant, was now just a ferryman. He lived in a simple hut. He ate what the land provided. He spent his days ferrying people from one bank to the other. There was no more ambition, no more frantic searching, no more need to get anywhere. There was only the present, simple and complete. We live in a world that has lost its enchantment, the pursuit of efficiency, the dominance of technique. The daily grind have stripped away the mystery, the sacredness, the deep meaning of things. People who once saw something special in every moment now see only resources to exploit, numbers to calculate, tasks to complete. The world became more efficient, but it lost its soul. Vasudeva represented the opposite of that. He saw the sacred in the ordinary. He found depth in simplicity. He didn't need elaborate rituals or complex philosophies or enlightened masters. The river was his temple. Silence was his prayer. The daily work of ferrying people was his spiritual practice. And slowly, Siddhartha began to see the world through those eyes. The river became Siddhartha's great teacher, not because it spoke, not because it explained, not because it offered doctrines or techniques or proven methods, but because it taught through presence, through the silent example of simply being what it was, without pretense, without effort, without trying to be something else. He would spend hours sitting on the bank, watching the water, without trying to understand, without analyzing, without looking for hidden meanings or secret lessons. Just present, as the river itself was present. And the river revealed truths that no book, no master, no teaching had been able to teach during all those years of searching. Truths that only appear when we stop looking. The first truth was about time. When you look at a river, you see that the water is always flowing. The water you see now isn't the same as a second ago. It's already past, already gone. Everything changes constantly, and yet the river remains. The river isn't made of any specific drop. The river is the flow itself, the movement itself. Life works like that. You aren't the same as 10 years ago. Cells have changed, thoughts have changed, beliefs, fears, desires, everything has changed. The young person you are no longer exists. The old person you will be hasn't arrived yet. And yet, there is something that remains. Something that observes all these changes without being swept away by them. The true self isn't in any specific phase. It is the flow itself, that which remains while everything changes. The second truth was about unity. Siddhartha heard many voices in the river, past and future, joy and pain, birth and death. All these voices at once, mixed together, inseparable. And when he could hear them all together, without separating, without preferring one over another, he realized they formed a single melody. Om, the unity of all things. The third truth was about resistance. Water doesn't fight the rocks. It doesn't try to forcefully remove obstacles. It doesn't get frustrated when it meets barriers. It simply flows around them. And over time, patiently, with no apparent effort, it shapes the rocks. Not through force, but through gentle persistence. Not through struggle, but through constancy. How many times do we waste energy fighting what can't be changed? Pushing against walls that won't give way? Arguing with reality as if reality could be defeated? The wisdom of the river is knowing when to flow and when to wait. Recognizing the difference between what can be changed and what needs to be accepted. One day, a woman arrived at the bank, carried by servants. She was very ill, wanting to cross to the other side before she died. Siddhartha recognized her. It was Kamala. The years had passed. She had left her life as a courtesan, become a follower of the Buddha, found some peace in the teachings. And now, at the end, fate had brought her back. But she wasn't alone. There was a boy with her, a boy with dark eyes, spoiled, ill-tempered. Her son, Siddhartha's son, who he never knew existed. Kamala died there, on that bank, in the arms of the man she had loved so many years before. And Siddhartha was left with the boy. This is one of the most painful chapters in the book, and also one of the most important. Siddhartha tried to be a father. He tried to give his son all the love he had, share the peace he had found, pass on the wisdom he had gained. But the boy wanted none of it. He had grown up in the luxury of the city, spoiled by servants, used to having everything. Now he was trapped in that simple hut, with a father he didn't know, living a life he despised. The boy rebelled. He yelled, insulted, broke things. He rejected every attempt at closeness with a seemingly bottomless rage, and Siddhartha suffered. He suffered like he had never suffered before. Not during the nights of fasting with the samanas. Not at rock bottom when he wanted to drown himself. The pain of being rejected by a child is unlike any other. The wound that won't heal. The question that finds no answer. Vasudeva watched in silence. He didn't give advice, didn't try to fix it, didn't offer solutions or cheap words of comfort. He just stayed. He was there, present, steady, while Siddhartha went through the storm. And that silent presence was worth more than 1,000 words. I understand that tendency of those who love to want to protect, to want to keep the other from suffering, to want to pass on the hard-won lessons. Siddhartha wanted to spare his son the mistakes he himself had made. He wanted to show him that the pursuit of pleasures and riches only leads to emptiness. He wanted to gift decades of condensed wisdom in a few conversations. But his son had to live it for himself, just as Siddhartha had to, just as each of us has to. No one learns from the mistakes of others. No one absorbs someone else's wisdom as if it were their own. We can hear the advice, nod our heads, even repeat the words. But real transformation only happens when we go through the process. Each generation repeats the same mistakes, lives the same illusions, discovers the same truths as if for the first time. One night, the boy ran away. He crossed the river, stole the money from the hut, and disappeared into the darkness. Siddhartha wanted to go after him, to search, bring him back, convince him, force him if necessary. But Vasudeva stopped him with just a look, and Siddhartha understood. Accepting what we cannot change is perhaps life's hardest lesson, because true acceptance isn't indifference. It isn't lack of love. It isn't giving up because you no longer care. It's love mature enough to respect another's journey, to understand that each person needs to live their own experiences, make their own mistakes, discover their own truths. You can't force anyone to learn what can only be learned by living. Siddhartha let his son go, and he cried. He cried like he hadn't cried when he left his father's house, or when he left Kamala, or when he thought about drowning himself. He cried because he finally understood what his own father had felt when he left, so many years before. The pain he had caused without knowing, the love he had received without recognizing. The years kept passing. Siddhartha grew old on the riverbank, ferrying people, listening to the water, deepening his understanding more and more. And one day, something was completed. There was no dramatic moment, no heavenly vision or thundering voice. There was just a morning like any other. Siddhartha looked at the river, at the trees, at the sky, at his own aged hands, and he realized there was no more separation. He was the river, he was the trees, he was the sky, he was everything, and he was nothing. The self he had sought his whole life, tried to find through rituals, asceticism, pleasures, business, pain, finally dissolved, and in its place, only presence remained. Pure, simple, complete. There are two ways of existing in the world. One where we relate to everything as objects separate from us, things to use, manipulate, control. And another where the separation disappears and we enter into true communion with what's before us. When we look not at something, but along with something. Siddhartha had reached this second mode permanently. He no longer looked at the world as something separate. He was the world looking at itself. Vasudeva noticed the change. He didn't need words. He looked at Siddhartha with a serene smile. He said his time had come to leave. He had fulfilled his purpose. He walked towards the forest and disappeared among the trees. Siddhartha continued. Now he was the ferryman, the silent presence on the riverbank. The master who taught nothing but radiated peace just by existing. The people who crossed the river noticed something different about that old ferryman. They couldn't explain what it was. It was something in his eyes, something in his smile, something in the way he moved the boat or looked at the water. But they felt that near him, their problems seemed smaller. Their anxieties lost weight, as if his mere proximity was enough to calm their inner waters. Then Govinda came, the childhood friend, the one who had left with Siddhartha so many years before, but chose to follow the Buddha while Siddhartha went on alone. Govinda, now also old white hair, face marked by time, still seeking, still without the peace he had searched for his whole life. He had followed all the teachings, practiced all the techniques, studied all the doctrines, and still enlightenment remained distant. Govinda didn't recognize Siddhartha at first. He just saw some ferryman sitting on the bank, looking at the water. But when Siddhartha smiled, something stirred in him. That smile, the same one he had seen on the Buddha's face decades before, the same one he had sought his whole life without being able to replicate. Govinda fell to his knees. He begged Siddhartha to share his wisdom. He begged for words, teachings, techniques, something to take with him. But Siddhartha had no doctrines to offer. He had no formulas or methods. He only had presence, only that which cannot be taught, only lived. He asked Govinda to come closer, to kiss his forehead, and when Govinda did that, something happened. For an instant, the analytical mind fell silent. The concepts stopped spinning, the thoughts stopped flowing, and he saw. He saw through Siddhartha all the forms of life, children and old people, animals and plants, birth and death, joy and pain, all at once, connected, inseparable. And at the center, Siddhartha's serene smile, the smile of one who knows because he has lived. Govinda wept. For the first time in his life, he touched what he was seeking, not through words or teachings, through the living presence of someone who had arrived. Hesse ends the book there. There is nothing more to say. Siddhartha found what he was looking for, not outside himself, in masters or doctrines, not through asceticism or pleasures alone. He found it within himself after living everything he needed to live, making every mistake he needed to make, suffering everything he needed to suffer. The final message is deeply hopeful, and it's that hope that made me want to share this story with you. Peace is possible. Inner stability exists and can be achieved. It's not a myth. It's not a privilege for monks on distant mountains or for people with easier lives than yours. It's possible for anyone willing to make the complete journey. And most importantly, not despite the life lived, but because of it. Every mistake, every detour, every fall, every moment of despair was a necessary part of the path. There is no shortcut to wisdom, but there is also no wasted experience. It all counts. It all teaches. It all prepares. Even the things that seemed like total losses. If you've made it this far in this video, you've probably walked quite a bit already. You've searched in places that promised answers. You've followed masters who seemed to know the way. You've lost yourself in pleasures that didn't satisfy. You've built castles that crumbled. You've hit rock bottom more than once. And maybe you're wondering if there really is a place of peace, solid ground where you can finally rest. There is. But that place isn't anywhere in the external world. It isn't in one more achievement, one more relationship, one more title, one more possession. That place is within you. It always has been. From the very first day, you just needed to live everything you've lived to finally see it. The river that Siddhartha contemplated for years continues to flow. Inside you, inside me, inside every person who has ever wondered if there's more to life than this endless rush, carrying all the experiences, memories, pains, and joys, carrying the mistakes you made and the successes you forgot to celebrate, carrying the people who passed through and the ones who stayed, carrying everything you were and everything you will yet be. And in the midst of this constant movement, this perpetual change, there is a point of stillness, a silent observer that was never touched by the chaos, that watched it all without getting lost in any of it, that remained while everything around it changed. That is you, the real you, not the character you play at work, at home, on social media, not the masks you wear to be accepted, not the stories you tell about yourself to justify your choices. Nothing and no one will shake you again. Not because you've become numb, not because you've built walls, but because you've finally found your own ground. The stability you always sought outside, you now recognize within, and standing on that ground, you can face any storm. You can lose everything again and still remain whole, because you've discovered that what you really are cannot be taken, cannot be lost, cannot be destroyed. If this video touched something in you, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These gestures help spread this content to others who are also searching. And if you want to go deeper, if you want to be part of a community that seeks this kind of reflection, consider joining our membership club. The conversation continues there in a more personal way. See you next time.